session is about the elements of a good design. Let's begin. Just a few things to run through before we get into it. Remember to put your email address into the chat feature. The chat feature is also where you will place your questions. During, after, anytime, whatever comes to mind, feel free to post it there. At the end of this session, we'll just give you guys some work to look at, some homework, and you can visit the IFRC's website for resources on most things that we will cover in this session. So the breakdown of today's session is aesthetic versus purpose, communicating with messaging, font, and color, which will be covered by Tiffany, and messaging in CA, which will be covered by Kathleen. So I will begin with aesthetic versus purpose. Aesthetic, in its fanciest of terms, is a branch of philosophy that speaks to what we find beautiful and what we're able to appreciate. When we talk about graphic design, which Tiffany will get further into, we're talking about things like typography, color, images, both vectors and realistic images, and how they come together to generate something at the end, which we will call our outputs, and just basically a visual that we can appreciate. Then we get into purpose, and purpose in graphic design, especially as relates to what we do with the IFRC, is very important. This speaks to how are we accomplishing our project and program goals with our graphic design outputs. How are these outputs being seen? When you're dealing with things like presentations, will the room be dark? Will the room have a lot of light? Those are things to consider when you're taking into consideration the colors that you choose, the fonts, how far in the back will someone be? Will they be able to read the font that you've chosen, the size, things like that? Consider disabilities, challenges, if you're dealing with an older group, you might not want to use a small font, color choices. These things are really important, and those map out the purpose of our graphic design tools and our graphic design outputs. So at this point, I will hand over to Tiffany, who will get further into font, color, things like that, and those will help inform your graphic design outputs. So we are on to Tiffany now.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I am going to talk about messaging, font, and color. If you would just give me 1 second. Sorry about that, guys. Some slight technical difficulties. Right, so I'm going to begin with communicating with messaging. And just as in the introduction to design webinar, where we discussed the importance of messaging on Friday, I am going to talk a little bit now about communicating with messaging. So, of course, you have to decide from the start, what are you trying to see? And when you do decide that, you will realize that there are many different ways to see what you're trying to see. But there are certain factors that you have to keep in consideration. Your target audience is always very important because that will help determine the aesthetics that you use, the fonts, the color, etc. So who is your target audience? Also, as an organization, a brand, a product, you have to decide, and a particular message as well, you have to decide what is your tone. Is it formal? Is it an invite to a gala? Or is it informal? Is it a fun day that you're having and you want people to come to support? Is it a cleanup campaign? So from the very start, you have to decide what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, and who you're going to say it to. When you've decided all of that, then you can look into your aesthetics, like font. So a font, you will all probably know about fonts from your use of Word documents, but fonts are what I like to call computer handwriting, but they're graphical representation of text that includes typeface, and sometimes this word typeface is used interchangeably with font. You will know from using your Word documents that font has a point size, whether it's small or large. It has a weight. It also has a style, whether it's in italics or not. Interestingly enough, there are fonts, and I like a few of them, that have been designed to look like or mimic handwriting. If you are into this field of design, and yes, designing fonts is a whole area of its own, it can get really interesting and technical with the talk of typeface, of glyphs, of kerning. But today we will stick to the basics and just talk about fonts. So when designing your visuals, you're going to include text. And if you're going to include text and not just images, you have to decide the font that is going to be used, depending on the visual, like I said, whether it's a flyer or a poster or a billboard. And like Shani said, the location is important. Determine where your audience is, how far back are they, if there are any persons with disabilities. All those things have to be taken into consideration if you're deciding on the size of your font, whether some of it is going to be in bold or in italics to highlight whatever it is you're trying to say. So I definitely can't sing, so you'll just have to imagine this. But these are some of the fonts that I like, and this is supposed to be sung to the tune of my favorite things from The Sound of Music. And if you look at my favorite fonts closely, you will notice that they're different, but almost all similar in one particular way. They are almost all sans serif fonts. And what are sans serif fonts, you ask? There are two types of fonts. Well, this webinar, we're going to deal with two types of fonts. There are actually others. There's a sort of in-between, but we'll stick to these two for now. So there's the serif font that has small lines at the ends of the characters, and there's the sans serif font that has no lines, and sans simply means without. So the fonts that I gravitate to, with a few exceptions, have no small lines. So there are the sans serif fonts. I find that they give a clean, modern look. However, I was taught that they are not easy to read, and that was a long time ago. And my prep for this webinar indicated that that sentiment really has not changed. People seem to think that serif fonts, because of the little lines, help you to move to the next character quickly, and so they are easier to read. Serif fonts are traditional fonts, and I know most of you would know about Times New Roman. That's a serif font. Whereas sans serif fonts are, like I view them, a little bit more modern, and I would prefer to use a sans serif font aside from, if ever a choice, Times New Roman would never be the font that I would use. The thing to remember about fonts is readability. Is it legible? There are some fonts you would only use as a heading, but not in a body of text, because that particular font might be considered decorative, like Old English or the Lucida calligraphy fonts. So a body of text in those fonts would be hard to read. So you'd use them for headings or subheadings or to decorate whatever your text. I know that most designers and some non-designers too are not fans of the ever popular Comic Sans fonts, and I can understand why, as it does give the impression of being for a particular audience. But that is why knowing your target audience is important. Because if your graphic or if your messaging is geared towards children, I see no problem with using the Comic Sans font, or if it is something that is particularly informal, you can use the Comic Sans font, but that is why you would have to know your audience. I read some interesting articles about the Baskerville font being the most trusted font. There was an experiment conducted a few years ago by Errol Morris, and if you all are interested in this type of thing, you can look up Errol Morris and the Baskerville font. And the result of the experiment was that the Baskerville font was seen as the most trusted font. Honestly, it's not the one that I would have chosen, but then again, serif fonts are not my thing, so I probably would not have chosen the Baskerville font as the most trusted font. But it's an interesting read, so you can check it out. Now we'll talk a little bit about color and the psychology of color. The psychology of color has been described as the study of hues as a determinant of human behavior. It's a bit of a controversial topic, as some people don't see it as a real thing or believe that color can affect us in a way that, the study says it does. This infographic shows how certain colors are perceived, what particular feelings they might invoke, and characteristics that they may denote. So color as a determinant of human behavior. Therefore, color can influence mood and even psychological reactions. Certain colors have been associated with increased blood pressure, increased metabolism, and eye strain. When I was a child, I was weirdly obsessed with learning Latin. And so I used to write down Latin words and their meanings in a copybook in red ink. And my mother would caution me that the red ink would strain my eyes. So people believe that, red is not a color that a lot of text should be in. If you wanted to, there's a lot you can learn about the use of color in design. We all learned about primary and secondary colors. Some of us may have even gone on to tertiary colors. And there's also tints and shades and tones. But I think for this group, we can leave all of that up to the professionals. We'll keep it simple today and stick to the basics and talk about contrast. Contrast is important for, again, legibility, just like your choice of font. So this is why they would advise, or it would be advisable to use black text on a white background and vice versa, as contrast offers easy identification of text and object from the background of any given visual. So you would use high contrast when you want things to stand out, because visibility is always the aim. I found this example here underneath the contrast, the picture, of poor contrast. As you can see, the first word is not particularly high contrast, as well as the second. So this is just to give you an idea when we talk about contrast, aside from the plain black and white, what we're referring to. You can use low contrast as well, but that would be more for non-essential text or images. Low contrast is used to accentuate and to complement, and as visibility there is not necessarily the aim. Although it's a science, color psychology is a science that says certain colors mean certain things to people. People's experience of color can be subjective. So you always have to keep that in mind. It may depend on location, culture, upbringing, and a host of other factors. Carnival in Trinidad was at the beginning of this month, and I have a cousin who will never play mass in a dark colored costume because for her, that's not carnival. Bright colors are for carnival. She also thinks that black feathers look like what we call kobo feathers in Trinidad, or what will be known as John Crow feathers in Jamaica. So she would never play that, and that's her own personal experience. In the Western world, white is seen as a symbol of purity and thus traditionally has been used for wedding dresses. However, in countries in the East, like India, white can be a symbol of mourning, and red is used for saris for weddings. In the first webinar, Shani mentioned that you have to be careful about colors and keep it in context. And another example of this is that red in Trinidad is used for one particular party, as you can see here, and they have co-opted not just the color but the word, and made an acronym out of it. So you wouldn't want, especially around election time, to use that particular color here because it would probably be associated with that particular party. The opposition uses yellow, so you probably wouldn't want to use yellow either. I know in Jamaica the political colors are orange and green. So you would want to, while making your determination about color, keep in mind that it is also about context, because you may look at color psychology and think that blue is a perfect color to be used for whatever it is you're going to do because of what the color psychology says, but perhaps the community that you're going into has poor associations with blue. So that's why it's important for your messages to be tested. This will give you a good idea of what the community believes or thinks and what they would want, what they would pay attention to, what they would see. So even if you have taken and applied all that we've told you here today, you may go into a particular community and may have to take some other decisions or reverse what you've decided to do because of the context, the colors and the fonts that community, that particular community may see those things in. So just remember to always test your messages so that you would use the appropriate visuals. And now I will pass you all on to Kathleen.
Good evening, everybody. Okay, my task today is to explain messaging in CE. What is CE? Some persons may have a good idea of what CE is, others may not. So basically, I'll just read to you, or you have in front of you, what the definition of CE is. It's about community. It's about an approach that the Red Cross has adopted in their programming and operations, and it's supported by a set of activities that help to put the community at the center of everything that we do. How are we doing this? By integrating communication and participation throughout the project cycle, program cycle, or operations. When we talk about the program cycle, we're talking about 4 basic steps in any project cycle. We're talking about assessment. We're talking about design and planning. We're talking about implementation and monitoring. We're talking about evaluation and learning. And at all aspects of this process, we like to engage the communities. We like to get in there and speak with them, find out what their challenges are, find out basically from them what they want, and how they would like to participate in whatever intervention we are getting involved in. Okay? Sorry. Now, there are basically four components to CA. One is participation and feedback. The second one is information as aid. Third one, behavioral and social change communication. And the fourth is evidence-based advocacy. All aspects of this, in each one of these, in each component, we have a method or a means of operating in terms of our messages. When we look at the participation and feedback aspects of it, our messages need to be clear, and this is something that we would have spoken about at the last webinar, and Tiffany would have indicated these characteristics. But I'm just going to go through it because it is part of the different types of messages that we have in CA. So when we're looking at participation and feedback, the characteristics of these messages must be that they need to be clear. They need to be understood. They need to be in very simple language so the community understands. The other day we were having a discussion about how best to share information from the meteorological department to the community. And one of the things that we realized was that we have the jargon that the meteorologists would use would not be a jargon that I may understand, Tiffany may understand, and definitely the communities may not understand. So how do we break it down for the community to understand what the Met Office is saying? So basically, the information has to be clear. It has to be in simple language that the community can understand. And we must also, while we're giving information, we also have to provide the avenues for feedback. It's one thing to give information, but if the community doesn't understand and they come back and they ask you, could you please explain, or how does this affect us? We have to be able to listen and provide that feedback. When we're communicating, we must be communicating about a program or a service that we're offering. Okay? In terms of information as aid, quite often in a situation, we may not necessarily be able to give physical products, but we can always give information, and that information can save a life. So when we're talking about information as aid, we're talking about addressing risks and vulnerabilities in the communities. We must be able to share the information about what the community needs and the community wants. Situation, like example, post Irma, Barbuda received a 40-foot container of fleece blankets. What could they do with that? They needed help, they needed blankets, but they didn't need fleece blankets. Again, when we're dealing with information as aid, it has to be short and simple. We do not want to, in a time of crisis, we do not want to be bombarding people with too much information, because then it gets confused and the information, when shared, may not be accurate because it's just too much. So whatever we're doing has to be short and has to be simple so that they will understand. And the information also has to be actionable. It must be advice that persons can act on. For example, Zika outbreak or in dengue outbreak, one of the things that we would say is clean barrels. Because if you clean the barrels, you are removing the eggs. So when we're saying that, or when we're sharing that information with them, it has to be information that is very simple and it's actionable. They can do something. Okay, and the advice is clean to help stave off new larvae from being born. Now, when we're looking at behavior and social change communication, that is a little more complex and difficult to understand. We have to be able to understand what are the underlying reasons why people behave the way they do. Why people can continue to engage in unsafe practices. Why do we need to know that? Because whatever information we are providing to them has to be able to address these situations and explain to them why what they have been doing for ages, for centuries, is unsafe and unhealthy for them. Example, collecting water in bins. Now, that is something that happens traditionally across the Caribbean and in many other, not only across the Caribbean, but across the world, because not everybody has access to potable water. Leaving barrels exposed can lead to disease, can lead to these mosquitoes breeding, and as a result, dengue and chikungunya and Zika spreading. But we need to understand, why are people collecting the water in barrels? Why, even if they do have potable water, why do they still continue the practice? Some people will tell you that they collect rainwater because it's better for you. It's supposed to, they prefer to drink rainwater. So it's a matter of taste. Some will tell you that they collect water because they prefer to wash their clothes in rainwater. It may come out soft. Oh. But people have cultural reasons in some instances as to why they do what they do. So we need to understand, while we're crafting our messaging, why people do what they do. And we also need to understand how best to create messages that will encourage them to change their way of life. We have to be able to explain to them what are the benefits of changing their behavior. Remember, I'm quite sure we do things that, and when people ask us why we do it because we saw our mothers doing it, or our fathers, or our grandparents. We don't have a logical reason why we do it. We just did it because it's a cultural thing. We've seen others do it, and when we have asked our mothers, why are you doing it? They say, because I tell you to do it. So it is a cultural thing. So and we now have to try and break that cycle and encourage persons to do something that they are not accustomed to doing it. And not only to do it, but to sustain that practice and then to encourage others to maintain that practice for the overall benefit of the community. So when we're looking at messaging and behavioral and social change, we must be able, in whatever message that we're doing, to explain why these benefits, what are the benefits of changing their behavior. We have to, in most instances, go beyond just the message. We have to go beyond what we are trying to convey, and look at an understanding of the cultural implications of everything that we do. In evidence-based advocacy, we have to present an issue and explain why it matters. We also have to include possible solutions, and we have to tailor the message to the target audience. Now, what evidence-based advocacy does is to give the communities a voice to express themselves, to share with their stakeholders, to share with their councils, their governments, why they want to do a particular, why they need representation for a particular aspect. So it is important when they are sharing or when they're collecting their information, that they are able to explain themselves and they are able to explain why this is a practice that needs to be done. Now, we would have spoken about the essential elements of messaging last webinar, and I'll just briefly go through it again because it is all part of what CA and CA, messaging and CA is all about. The essential elements include keeping it simple. We don't need to have an entire page of information that can be simply conveyed in 5 words. Whatever we're doing, our messages have to communicate a benefit to the community, a benefit to the individual, a benefit to the nation. The third element is it must provide a call to action. And by call to action, that we must be asking them to do something. Simply wash your hands, cover your bins, clean up your communities. All of these are actions that will support or help your community to become a cleaner and a safer place for you to be. When we're contextualizing a message, when we're putting it together, there are 5 elements that we must be careful to include at all times. And we've spoken about them already, and again, I'll just briefly go through them. We must understand the language. We must use words and phrases that are easily understood. And one moment, please. Yeah, sorry about that. Right. So yes, the language that we use must be simple. It must be everyday words, and the message itself must be brief. We must also have an appreciation or an understanding of the level of knowledge that the communities have. What is how are they able to understand and appreciate what it is that we're trying to see? We also must be very, very aware of the cultural beliefs and practices that exist in a community. You would not necessarily, in some communities that you, for example, would not go in and speak about condoms. You would not go in and speak about certain types of meat. You have to understand the community. There are some communities that you would go into where you only get to speak to the men and not to the women, or vice versa, that only the women come to the meetings and not the men. So you have to understand the cultural beliefs and the practices of a particular community when you're contextualizing a message. The feasibility. When you're creating a message, the messages need to provide information that people find useful and that they can act upon. There is no point in creating a message that tells people to do something when the situation on the ground makes it impossible for them to follow that advice. And the last one is to explain why. We always have to remember to people. It's no longer, you're growing up and people and your parents will tell you do something because I told you to do it. It's not like that. Do because I say so. it's about you have to go into you have to be able to explain to the community why this particular practice needs to be done, why they need to change the way that they believe, all the things that they believe, all the things that they've been doing. We have to be able to explain to them what are the alternatives. We don't only say to them, stop doing it. We also have to say, we have to explain to them why this is not a good practice and why, how it may impact later on for the next generation. And in the hope and the understanding that by explaining to them why it is not a good practice, they may, in essence, change what it is that they're doing. A simple one is wash your hands. I'm wasting water. Why should I wash my hands? Health reasons. You carry disease. If you use the washroom, you come back out, you carry disease on your hands. Okay? And it's also important when you're contextualizing a message to test these messages before you go out into the field. Testing them simply could be in your office. You can have a focus group to test your messages, representatives from the community, because again, if the wording isn't right, if the context isn't right, the language isn't right, then your message will be ignored. Now, how do we also have what is called a message development rubric. Now, this helps to assess the messages across 5 criteria. 1, simplicity. 2, communications of a benefit. 3, a call to action. 4, context appropriate. And 5, appropriate to method. When we talk about simplicity, we're talking about just how simple or how easily understood the question is. When we're talking about communicating a benefit, that whatever is being done, whatever is the benefit that we're trying to share with the community, that it is obvious, that the message is obvious and easily understood. When we say call to action, we expect that message will give clear guidance on what is to be achieved and the benefit of that particular action. When we talk about context appropriate, we're talking about how appropriate is the message for the target audience, taking into consideration all the cultural and religious context that may be existing in that particular community, and to make sure that it provides useful information to the target audience. When we talk about appropriate to method, we're talking about what is the method that we're going to be using to convey that message. If we're out in the countryside and there is no electricity, or there is limited Wi-Fi, is WhatsApp a good way to convey messages? Would the television be a good way to convey the message? So you have to make sure that the medium through which you're conveying the message is appropriate to the context, the community, and that the words and the images that you're using are also appropriate to the context. Okay, now this rubric consists of a score rating 3, 2, and 1. Now it starts off with, for example, I'll give you one example. Sorry. If we look at simplicity, the highest rating would be use of image, which is 3, would be use of images is relevant and engaging, and the design and wording is not too busy. So that would get a rating of 3. The second one is 2, use of image is somewhat relevant and possibly engaging. However, the design wording is somewhat busy or distracting. That would get a rating of 2. And the first one is use of image is not relevant to the message and is distracting, is too busy, and does not convey the message. So once you use this rubric, you can have an idea whether or not what you're trying to present or what you're trying to convey is suitable. There's a maximum score of 15. So if you score less than 15, then you really need to relook your message. All of this information is available in the CE guide, which is available on our IFRC website. So you can go there as well and get this information. This is part of what I've pretty much shared here with you, is both part of the toolkit as well as the CE manual. Both are available for your review on our website. And I think that I am finito. So any questions? Anyone wants to ask anything? Don't all jump at the same time. Shani, I'm going to pass back over to you.
Hi, Kathleen. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathleen and Tiffany, for your support. Additionally, I'd just like to remind everyone to please drop your email into the chat box. I will be able to send you IFRC-related resources about graphic design, visibility, CA, communications, things like that. And then additionally, we'd just like to send out the links that correspond to some of the things we will be teaching within this course. We will be uploading all of these presentations to YouTube, these webinars to YouTube, as well as the presentations will be available on the CADRIM website, and we can share those via email as well. Additionally, I would like everyone that is present to become okay with the Canva platform, as that will be the tool we use next week. And that is a practical session. And through that session, we're hoping that we can develop some outputs that you can use with your NS, with your projects, with your programs. And I will be there to guide you. And yeah, just stay tuned for that. But that will be this Friday, actually. And that will be a tutorial session. Any questions, feel free to ask, and feel free to please put your emails in the chat feature. Okay, guys, if there are no questions, we will conclude today's session. Okay, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Tiffany. And
Thanks, everybody.
We will see you guys on Friday at 2 o'clock.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.